My name is Susan Almy. I'm a state rep from Lebanon, which is the city next door. 23 years ago, I believe it was, I was present in Reps Hall when the first, at least in modern times, attempt to repeal the death penalty happened. It was a bill to increase the death penalty. And two fairly young, for the legislature anyway, reps got up and gave phenomenal speeches. One of them was Cliff Belo from Lebanon, who later became a senator, and the other one was Rennie Cushing, who is here with us today. And they turned an audience which was going to vote for the committee report, which was to expand the death penalty, into a bill to eliminate the death penalty. It did not do as well in the Senate. We've been fighting ever since, and on this may be the last year we have to deal with this. I did just want to say that Jean Burling, the retired judge that co-sponsored this, is safely in Florida at the moment and did not want to come back to the cold, even for this event. So that takes care of two of us, and in a few minutes, I think right now, Senator Hennessy is going to speak.
What a huge honor to have all of you here for this wonderful evening event. And I have the wonderful honor, also myself, of introducing one of our first speaker, maybe the reason many of you are here, Jodi Picoult. And I want to tell you, I was driving into Concord this morning, and I was thinking, what are the words that I would use to describe Jodi Picoult? And I used I had a lot, but here's what I came up with. Prolific, that's obvious. Prescient. Curious, brave, empathic, and generous. So I'm going to talk about those aspects of Jodi Picoult, and because there are many, many more as well. Prolific. She has, I think it's 25 novels. Is that correct? Because it's almost like nobody lists them all because they take up too much space. But and she has over 14 million of her books in print around the world and translated into 34 different languages. Yes, she's won many awards, but the one I like the best, because my father went to Princeton, is Princeton said that she was in the top 10 of 25 top influencers. I mean, oh! That's when I will know I made it. Anybody here from Dartmouth? No? Okay. In 1992, 5 years after she graduated from Princeton, 5 years after I graduated from Dartmouth, I'm pretty sure I was looking for a job. I don't know what I was doing. She published her first novel, Songs of the Humpback Whale. And she went out of the gate with good, brave, interesting topics. In 2003 was the first time I really was, I'm sorry to say, introduced to, I've been catching up, but introduced to Jodi's work in when my children were assigned in school, My Sister's Keeper. It was a very popular book for English teachers and others to assign. And you probably know it was made into a movie with Cameron Diaz. No small deal. You're going to hear more about the 2008 publication, which was Change of Heart, and is part of the reason that Jodi's here. Between the Lines. Now, I grew up thinking I was going to be a Broadway musical star. Very few people know that about me, but it's true. And so this impresses me enormously. Between the Lines has been made into a musical in New York. And Small Great Things was, everyone probably has a favorite. I think Small Great Things was my favorite. So I don't know if anyone who's read it. I have a daughter who's an OBGYN in Hartford, Connecticut. I have another daughter who's a public defender and who told me to read White Fragility, which I recommend to everybody. And so I made them read it, and we had many discussions about it. It's really a remarkable book, and that one was very prescient. I mean, it came out close to the last elections. Apparently, the movie rights have been sold, and we can expect maybe to see Julia Roberts and Viola Davis in it. I can hardly stand it. And her latest is A Spark of Light, which I've just started listening to on my way to Concord. Prescient. Her topics include cloning, school violence, white supremacy, racism, power, privilege. And many were topics that we were thinking about because of Jodi's books before they were actually on the front page of newspapers and in magazines. She's curious. The research she does is amazing. I mean, my daughter who's the OBGYN and my daughter who's the public defender both said, oh my God, has she been an OBGYN nurse and a public defender? Because she's right on. What the trait I probably like best of all talking about is how brave she is. Because I really believe that this is a time when we all, but particularly women, need to be brave. She writes about topics that other people avoid. And she does it in a way that makes us all feel as if we've just taken a class in college, but we're also warm feelings and are entertained. I've learned in the Senate, I've learned a lot of things in the Senate. I can't tell you about them all here. But I've learned it's sometimes a little easier to be brave when you're well prepared. And I think that there's no author who's more prepared in terms of research. I've also learned that in the Senate they really don't care about research. But that's another issue. They've already made their minds up, some of them. Not so much since the last election. She's empathic. We know her characters. We care and we relate. The Boston Globe said, quote, Picoult is a skilled wordsmith and she beautifully creates situations that not only provoke the mind but touch the flawed souls in all of us. Let's see, she's generous. She's generous in her writing. She trusts us to get it, which I love. She trusts us to move beyond it, to learn, to reach. And in her other life, she's received many awards and rewards. And she supported many important causes, including being a member of the leadership committee for the New Hampshire Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty.
Figures, I do an event in my hometown. My husband's not here to hear how great I am.
We'll tell him.
Thank you. So I have notes because I'm going to be talking about some research that I did in 2007, and I can't remember anything anymore, so please excuse me for referring to them. The reason I'm here tonight is because of a book I wrote called Change of Heart. It came out in 2008, and it was about the death penalty in America, and among other things. Which meant that in 2007, I was doing a great deal of research about this topic. Why did I want to write about it? Because I tend to write about the things that really upset me. And when I write a book, the act of writing a book for me is taking apart all the pieces, learning everything I can, and then putting it all back together. And you'll hear a little bit of some of what I learned after I talk about the research. So I wanted to set this book in New Hampshire, because a lot of my books are set in New England. This is my adopted state. I love it. And I wanted to write about the death penalty in New Hampshire because, as I'm sure many of you know, we have that on our books, even though it has not been used since 1939. So I started off by going down to see what they call the death cell in New Hampshire. What it is an empty room full of moldy mattresses. That's all that they have in there right now. The old gallows for the state of New Hampshire is now the chaplain's office at the state prison. Do with that what you will. Clearly, for the purposes of my book, I needed to move outside of New Hampshire. I needed to see what a working death row looked like. So I actually went to Florence, Arizona. And I wanted to schedule a tour. I wanted to talk to people who could explain to me how their prison system worked with the death penalty. And I wanted to schedule a meeting with a death row inmate to speak to this person and learn their story. So I got on a plane, and I flew out of Manchester, and I was somewhere over the United States when the Public Information Office of Florence, Arizona's state prison canceled my visit because they decided I was the wrong kind of medium. I did not know this until I arrived at the prison. So I am the person who was banging at the door begging to be let into the prison. Okay? And they did eventually let me in, and I smiled really pretty and I batted my eyelashes and I asked, could I just see death row? Could someone just take me on a tour? And I had a guard who was willing to take me around. The thing about a death row, working death row, is that if it is working, it's really boring. Because in Florence, Arizona, the prisoners are locked up 23 hours a day. For 1 hour a day, they each get time outside individually. And it's really, really kind of quiet and still. So I talked to the guard who was walking me through, and I smiled a little wider, and I asked, could you just take me over to the death house? Which is what they call the place where they do the executions. So he took me over there, and there is a room there that has, it doubles as both the place where they do the lethal injections, but they also have a gas chamber there, because every state that has the death penalty on their law books has two forms of execution. Lethal injection is one of them, and then there will be another one. In the state of New Hampshire, it is still hanging. And I kid you not, the law states that if lethal injection is inconvenient, they can use the other method.
Oh, inconvenient.
So I was in this room looking around. I was flipping a light switch when a woman walked in and she said, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm so sorry, I was here. Someone was giving me a tour of the death house. And she said, well, what did they tell you? And I told her. And she said, I wish they hadn't told you that. And I said, well, who are you? And she said, I'm Warden Frigo. I run this place. So I said, well, maybe you'd like to talk to me. And she got all huffy, but then she said, you know, okay, fine, you know, because clearly she would have had the right answers. So I started off by asking her, have you ever presided over an execution? And she said, yes. And I said, have you ever attended an execution that you were not presiding over? And she said, that's a very personal question. And I said, yes. And she looked at me for a minute and she said, yes, I have. And she told me the story of a woman named Deborah Milkey. Deborah was a woman in Arizona who was convicted of taking her 4-year-old out to the desert where she met with a couple of guys who she had hired to kill her son for insurance money. She was convicted of this crime. She was put on death row, and Deborah's parents, her family, nobody spoke to her anymore because of this. And Warden Frigo said that she was going to attend the execution because she is a Catholic, and someone has to pray for her soul. So I said, you're a Catholic. Do you believe in the death penalty? And she looked at me and she said, I used to. Then she turned to her assistant and she asked him to go back to her desk and to get this binder. And this binder it was like this thick, seriously. And it was basically, it's a binder that every inmate on death row in the state of Arizona sues to get a copy of and is routinely denied. And it is a very complicated set of explanations and statutes about how you go about executing someone in the state of Arizona. And Warden Frigo spread this right out on the lethal injection table and began to read to me from this binder. And I spent several hours with her learning how the state of Arizona does this. And again, this is usually kept secret. Most of executions are done literally behind a curtain because I don't think they want people to know how they're done. I don't think they want the public to hear this. In Arizona, that binder included information about how they do dry runs of the execution and how they time them so that the victim's family and the inmate's family will never come face to face inside the prison. Information on how you find a vein for lethal injection. If you have, for example, an intravenous drug user and it's hard to find a vein, they will go between the toes or in the groin. They tell you where the doctor is supposed to be during all of this. A lot closer than I think the Hippocratic Oath would like them to be, is the answer. And they talk about the method of execution. Here's how it works in Arizona. An inmate is brought in and is strapped onto a gurney, and he has a line, or she has a line in her arm. And that line splits, goes underneath a little kind of a curtain into a different room, and it splits off into 3 different tubes. And there are 3 guards who have volunteered to be the executioners for the day. Each one of them holds a hypodermic. One of those hypodermics has the potassium chloride in it that will stop the heart. They don't know who has that hypodermic that makes it more random. What happens is the inmate is strapped down. This is behind a curtain. There is a doctor in the room as well who is going to administer the sodium pentothal. And the idea behind that is this is what makes execution, quote, humane. Sodium pentothal should anesthetize the inmates so they don't feel potassium chloride in the bloodstream, which is like your veins being on fire. So what happens is the warden walks in and she reads a legal document that is the warrant of execution. And then she says to the inmate, "Do you have any last words?" That is the cue for the physician to begin to administer the sodium pentothal. Now, an inmate's last words could be anything from, "Mom, I love you," or "I'm sorry." It's usually not a 20-minute diatribe. As soon as they are done speaking, the warden says, "May God have mercy on your soul." That is the cue for those 3 guards on the other side of the curtain to push down on the hypodermics. So I want you to think about that for a second. Think about the length of time that the inmate says their last words. It is not nearly enough time for sodium pentothal to actually anesthetize anything. When I was writing all this down like crazy, and when I asked the warden at the end of this, you know, if she believes that the death penalty is effective, she said no. She said it is her job and she will do it. But she has seen feeble old men executed who are not a danger to anyone because that's how long it takes the legal system to run its course over appeals. She has, by the same token, seen recidivism. She has seen very violent men turn back out on the street because their crimes didn't fit the label of something that would warrant execution. And she says, when you begin to take it apart like that, justice just isn't very just. Everyone that I met who worked in Florence, Arizona, in the death row area, said they would continue to do their job, but they did not believe that the death penalty works. Warden Frigo retired very unexpectedly 1 month after my visit. I like to think it was my fault, but I don't know. But as I said, they had canceled my visit, so I did not get to meet an inmate during that first trip to Arizona. I had to go back. And I did, and I met a man named Robert Towery. Robert was a very polite man about my age. He stood up when I came in on the other side of the glass. He called me ma'am, and he was more than happy to meet with me. In 1991, he was convicted of an armed robbery. During the commission of the robbery, he told the man who's, it was like a shop that he was, like a motorcycle shop that he was robbing. He told the guy who owned it, "I'm going to inject you with a sedative to knock you out so you don't see what I'm doing. But he actually was injecting him with battery acid, and he killed the man. He was also high as a kite at the time. By the time that I met Robert, he had been sober for 10 years. He had also done restorative justice work with the victim's family, who no longer wanted him to be executed, although the state of Arizona did not see it that way. Robert and I had a great relationship that went on for 3 years. Even though I saw him just that once, we wrote each other at least once a month, if not more. We would talk in our letters about the plots of Grey's Anatomy and Lost. We talked about our kids. He knew all about my children, and he had kids as well, and had reconnected with a son that he hadn't seen for 15 years, who came to visit him at the prison. He was a remarkable artist. And as you probably know, on death row, you can't just go get a set of paints. So he had to create his own set of art supplies. And for example, he would get paper, but then he would use the candy shell from M&Ms. He would dilute with water for pigment. He would use coffee in different shades to make skin tones. He would scrape bits of magazines and newspapers and dilute that to get the ink loose so that he could use that for pigment as well. And he made beautiful, beautiful portraits for me. At one point, when he met with his son confessed to him that he was gay. And he wrote me immediately because he knew that my oldest son was gay. And he said, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do, how should I treat him? And I said, treat him like you're his dad and love him. And we had a lot of conversations about that so that they got to a good place in their relationship. He was, by all accounts, a really lovely man who committed a truly heinous act. And that really was the question for me. We all know that it's wrong to execute somebody who's innocent and that happens. But is it wrong to execute someone who has done something terrible? And that was what I began to pick apart in my book, when I began to look at the arguments that people hold up in support of the death penalty. Things like, for example, oh, it's a deterrent. Not true. We know from many studies that the states that have the death penalty are the ones with the highest murder rates. People say, oh, you know, it's cheaper, actually, to have the death penalty. Again, not true. It varies from state to state, but for example, in the state of Texas, it costs approximately 3 times more to execute someone than to have them in jail for life, or in prison for life. And it's usually the cost of the appeals process, which, as you know, takes many, many years. Is it fair? Well, not really. A lot has been made of race and the death penalty. It seems to matter less what the race of the inmate is. What seems to matter more is the race of the victim. White victims tend to wind up with a conviction for the death penalty. Not true of victims of color. The best argument, and the only argument that I could find in support of the death penalty when I was done doing all this research, was one that Scott Turow, another novelist and lawyer, has come up with, which is, it is the adult equivalent of, I do not want you in my sandbox. I have nothing in common with you. You will never have anything in common with me. I am going to remove your DNA from the system. If you can feel comfortable with that, then I guess you can feel comfortable with the death penalty. I don't. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Robert and what happened, because it was a pretty magical moment for me. In 2012, Robert knew that he got an execution date, and his lawyers came to New Hampshire and they met with me, and they took all of our letters and all the art that he had sent me, and they tried to use it for his appeal. It failed, and he was given an execution date. And he had said to me, will you come to my execution? And I said, yes, I will, if I am not on a book tour. And I was on a book tour the day of his execution. It was a day in March in 2012. Now, Change of Heart had come out in 2008. I'd written 4 books past that. And I was in Seattle in front of a whole group of people talking about some other book, and we got to the question and answer session. And a woman stood up and she goes, I'm sorry, this isn't about about this current book, I was wondering if I could ask you a question about change of heart. And I said, you know, I'm really glad you did. And I said, I'd like to tell you guys about a friend of mine. And I told this group at the Seattle Public Library about Robert Towery and about what I learned from him and about the fact that he had been executed that day. And I went home, back to my hotel room, and I opened my computer, and there was a Facebook message from a stranger. And I opened it up, and it said, my dad said you were a good friend to him, and he hoped that you could be a good friend to me. That's Robert's son, Corey. We are friends. He has met my children, and they're friends. And I like to think that somehow Robert knows that this happened, and that he still remembered in some way. I leave you with that, and with knowing that I think as long as you talk about a person, they're still with you. And I appreciate the opportunity to bring Robert back for this moment. And I truly hope that 2019 is the year to repeal the death penalty in New Hampshire. Thank you.
Thank you, Jodi, for that. I'm Rennie Cushing, and I'm a state rep from Hampton, so it's good to be out here on the West Coast. And I've been involved, as Susan said, in opposition to the death penalty here in New Hampshire for a couple of decades or more. And I come to this work because my father was shotgunned to death in front of my mother in our family home. And as a survivor homicide victim, thinking about what you do in the aftermath of a murder, it's not really an intellectual exercise, it's part of my life. And I'm like many people who are counter to what might be the widely held paradigm that all family members of murder victims want the death penalty, that they need it in order to find healing or closure or something like that. But in reality, you know, the one thing that the death penalty doesn't do, the one thing that people really want, and that's to bring back our loved one. It fills another coffin and creates another grieving family, like Robert's family. Anyways, I'm here on behalf of the coalition, and I'm going to talk a little bit afterwards about where we are at this particular moment in history in New Hampshire with the death penalty. We've been working on it really since 1834, when Governor William Badger first asked the legislature to abolish it. We think that we're going to hopefully complete the task this year. But one of the people that I'm here to introduce, our guest speaker, who I had the opportunity to meet a few years ago when the two of us were part of a speaking tour in Montana. And it was the survivor homicide victim and death row survivor. Made for an interesting little combination, and we shared a few adventures. Sabrina has been here to New Hampshire a couple years ago when we were faced with a situation where, rather than repealing the death penalty, there was an effort to expand the death penalty. The effort was to expand the death penalty for the killing of a child. And when you listen to Sabrina's story, you realize how appropriate it was that she would be here, that she would come to the Granite State and talk about the death penalty and the murder of a child, or the death of a child. So I'm going to let her tell her story. Sabrina Butler, welcome.
First of all, thank you guys for coming, because without y'all, nobody would hear my story. I'd be talking to the walls. Anyway, my name is Sabrina Butler, and in 1989, I was 17 years old. I lived in a small town called Columbus, Mississippi. I used to, back then, my mom wasn't around, so I kind of was thrust into being an adult, and I was a child myself. My son at the time was 9 months old, and I decided that I wanted to go jogging this particular night. And I put him to sleep and I put him in his crib, and I jogged down to the end of the street. I wasn't gone but 10 minutes, but that 10 minutes almost cost me my life. When I got back to the house, I went in the room because I had him timed already, and I kind of knew when he was going to wake up. Well, he wasn't breathing. So I panicked. I ran outside, and where I lived at in this particular apartment complex, the people didn't know me. So people were not really willing to open their doors, but this one lady upstairs, she opened her door, and I was screaming to her trying to get help. And she said, "My kids are in the bed, I don't have time." So she closed the door in my face. So I had to run downstairs. When I ran downstairs, I started beating on doors. I don't remember what door, but I was trying to get somebody to help me because it was almost like 12 o'clock at night. One lady came and she grabbed my baby and she ran in and she put him on the floor and she started CPR. And I ran back out to try to get somebody to take me. I got this one couple who decided that they would help me. So I ran back in and she told me to hold his nose, press in his stomach, and blow in his mouth. Well, I didn't know that that was wrong at the time, but I applied adult CPR to a 9-month-old all the way to the hospital. When I got there, the first thought in my mind was that, oh man, I'm in trouble because I left my son at the house. But I never thought in a million years these people would come back and call me a murderer. So I said to myself, I can't be honest. I can't tell the truth. So I made up all these different stories about what, could have happened, trying to cover up the fact that I left him at the house by himself. So they sent me home that night. I kept pacing the floors at the house trying to figure out what happened. Why did he stop breathing? What's wrong? This is a joke. This is a dream. This can't be real. So I got up the next morning and I thought to myself that, I'm going to go to the hospital and see what the autopsy report said. Thinking, not knowing that an autopsy report takes a long time to, for them to decide or find out the cause of death. Well, when I got there, the detectives were there. One detective, he took me to the police car and he said, I sure hate you in all this trouble because if you wasn't in so much trouble with me, you could do some things. That's the statement he said to me. Put me in the back of the car. I got to the police station. When I got there, they took me into this little room and it was 2 officers there. And before I could sit down, they automatically started. They said, "No, you stomped the baby. You beat him. This is what you did. You murdered your child. You did this." And I kept, the interrogation was like 4 hours. I kept trying to explain to them what happened. They didn't want to hear that. I was so scared because I thought they were going to jump on me. The way they were in my face and lunging at me like they wanted to fight. So I gave up. The detective wrote a statement, and the statement that he wrote is the initial statement that they used to convict me with. When I got to trial, I hadn't seen my attorneys but 2 days before the trial. I sat in the county jail 1 year before I even saw the attorneys. Didn't even know who my attorneys were. Didn't know anything about trial preparations. Didn't know what I was supposed to do. When I met him, he said, "All I want you to do is sit before the jury." It was two attorneys. When the jury came in, they were all white except for 2. One was an alternate. And the only thing I knew that I could understand at that age was that they weren't concerned about what my attorneys were saying. They kept looking at the district attorney. Everything that he said, they were listening. They was at attention. They was on the edge of their seats like they were seeing some kind of movie. But every time my attorney said something, they were looking on the floor. They was looking at the ceiling. They was everywhere besides what he was talking about. And one of the attorneys, I kept smelling alcohol on his breath, and he kept saying, "Don't worry about it. We got this thing nipped in the bud. You just keep looking at the jury. You just keep looking at the jury." And he was popping can in his mouth the whole time. Next thing I know, they came back and they said, "We find you guilty." They charged me with capital murder in the course of child abuse. They sentenced me. They charged me with a child abuse charge that wasn't even a law until 23 days after I was incarcerated. Then, after that happened to me, my attorneys decided, "Well, we're going to put you on the stand." The whole time I was begging in the first part of the trial to get on the stand so that I could tell my part of what happened. They said, "No, we don't do that, but we're going to put you on the stand now." Okay, in the second phase, a jury already knows that you're going to get up there and plead for your life, so they didn't really want to hear anything else. They pretty much had their minds made up as to what they were going to do before they even saw me, actually. So they did sentence me to die. He made me stand up before the judge, and the judge said, Sabrina Butler, will you stand? I stood. He said, we sentence you to die by lethal injection, and may God have mercy on your soul. And I said, the only thing I had left to say was, no, may God have mercy on your soul, because you just don't know what you just did. And I walked out. That was the only thing that I had mustered to say, because they had completely just not listening to what I had to say and just threw me away. When I walked out of the courtroom, they sent me to Rankin County. When I got to Rankin County, I had to walk with chains around my waist and my hands and my ankles. I had to create a walk because there was a security guard next to me. And he said, you see those inmates out there? He said, we tell them when to go to sleep. He said, we tell them what to eat. He said, but you will die here. And when he said that, I just lost everything I thought I had. I was crying before I got to maximum security because I had never been to prison in my life. When I got there, they put me in a 6x9 cell, no bigger than your bathroom. I had a toilet and a sink connected together and a slit in the door and one little window. The bad part about being on death row was that waiting to die and knowing my death date. I got sentenced March the 13th of 1990. My death date was July the 2nd of 1990. My attorneys didn't tell me that the state had to exhaust all state remedies before they could actually carry out a death sentence. So when the date came, I paced the floors. I listened for every sound, every chain, because I actually thought that was the day that they were going to come and kill me. I didn't have my mom. I didn't get a chance to grieve my son. Didn't know where they buried him. And I was going to die for something that I didn't do. But it was a girl that was on death row with me at the time who said, I don't know you. She said, but they can't do anything. She said, Sabrina, you're going to be okay. She kept talking to me. But even though somebody's talking to you and you know that you have a sentence of death, that's hard. Man, that's hard. There were days I had rats in my cell. I had ants on my tray. I had to learn how to stay warm. I had to learn how to stay from being cold. No human contact. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And to be innocent is one of the worst things I could ever imagine for anyone to have to go through. I did 2 years, 9 months on death row when my sentence was overturned for prosecutorial misconduct. He took the jury to a picnic where they were supposed to be sequestered. He talked to all the doctors and nurses in the same room. That's why they already knew what they were going to do before they saw me. I was the wrong color. I didn't have money. And he was 25. And he was an overzealous prosecutor who wanted to make a name for himself, and so he chose me to do that. I ended up with 2 more sets of attorneys, one named Clive Smith. He is English, lives in England, and he's over the reprieve, Guantanamo Bay, where he helps people that are wrongfully convicted and things like that to get out of Gitmo. And I had an attorney from Mississippi. They came in, they found out my son had heart problems, kidney problems, and chronic bowel syndrome. It was nothing that I ever did. It wasn't even a crime. I just didn't know how to apply CPR. He had medical problems that stopped him from breathing in the beginning, and I just didn't know how to apply CPR. When my sentence was overturned, I got a new jury. He came in and he brought all the medical records that was already there all along. It was at the hospital the whole time. All he had to do was go there. But my attorney only got $1,500 to do my capital case. So therefore, he didn't really do the investigative work. When he showed all the evidence to the jury, they exonerated me in an hour. I walked out of prison December the 18th of 95. I walked around from 1995 to 2009 without a job. Nobody would hire me because it was still on my record. Then in 2009, Mississippi decided to pass a law for wrongful conviction for exonerees, and they paid me what they decided I should have. But I didn't get my case expunged until 2014. Today, I have a 16-year-old daughter that has the same disease my son has. She, they said she would lose both of her kidneys. And that's kind of hard because we have to go to the doctor all the time because she's been taking high blood pressure pills since she was 10. And the kidneys they have more cysts, look like, every time we go. And I'm still fighting the state of Mississippi because his death certificate still says he was murdered. And all they have to do is fix it. And they don't want to do that. I mean, we're going to have to take him to court, my lawyer said, because it's just a matter of them reading the medical records. And since we have a new state coroner, I guess he doesn't, I don't know what the case is, but I do this because I try to educate as many people as I can to let you know that there's 5 reasons I have that I don't think the death penalty should be on the books. 1, you have victims' family members who have to deal with the fact that they lost their loved ones, and the state is study calling them saying, oh, we're going to kill them today, but then they get a stay of execution. Oh, we're going to kill them tomorrow. What do you think that does to the victims' family members if you're constantly calling them and nothing happens? That keeps that case open. That keeps the memory alive. 2, it's expensive. It doesn't, and 3, it doesn't deter crime. 4, if a person commits a crime and they go the police officers and all that go on the scene. You have the police officers, you have the forensic people, you have whoever take the pictures, whatever the case may be on the scene. You cannot tell me, us being human beings, that there is no mistakes going to be made. There's no way, because none of us are perfect, none of us. So with that being said, how can you decide who lives and who dies? Aren't you doing the same thing that you own the person that actually committed the crime? Aren't you doing the same thing if you're killing them? How does that work? I don't understand that. I just don't understand that logic. If you say, okay, we're going to kill you, I mean, you're wrong for killing, but then we turn around and we kill you. Ain't that the same thing? Murder is murder no matter how you do it. I just think that the money could be put elsewhere. I think that a life sentence is the best possible route. That's 5th, because if you get it wrong, you can go back and you can fix that. If you gave a person a life sentence and they didn't commit the crime. But if you give a person a death penalty, how can you go back and fix it if you've killed them and you say, oh, okay, my bad, let me dig you up and say, okay, I'm sorry. I mean, really, how can you fix that mistake? How can you fix that? I just think that we as a people should learn to love one another. And I'm not saying that if a person goes out and commit a crime, yes, they should serve their time. They should serve every bit of it. If it hadn't been for me being in maximum security, I wouldn't be standing here now with the charge that I had. Accused of killing a child, I wouldn't have made it. Ain't no way. Prison is horrible. They rape you. They do I've saw so much stuff in my years of being in prison than I could see in a lifetime. And I don't care if they put water beds in there, I'm never going back. I don't care what they do to prison system. I just think it's horrible. And like I said, I've done this since I've been out, and I'm gonna keep on doing it. I don't care who I have to talk to. God himself, I don't care. I gotta do this. I mean, because it's wrong. The death penalty is wrong. It is wrong on so many levels. We need to stop. We really do. That's my story.
I'm going to try and moderate some questions that people have. And for Sabrina, she can just stand here and answer themselves if she feels. feels comfortable. You want to take them on?
Ask me anything. Just ask. You want to know, the more you ask, the more you know, the better you know. You know what I mean? If it's prison, if it's whatever, just ask me. You know, I like answering questions. So.
Have you been involved with the Innocence Project that works to get innocent people out of jail?
Not exactly with them. I work with an organization called Witness to Innocence, and we are all death row exonerees. That's all we are. And we go about the states, different states, talking to different people. And I also work with another organization called TADP. It's Tennesseans Against the Death Penalty. So I've been doing this a lot. We've went to Washington, D.C. to try to talk to the DOJ. We're in talks with them. And we were trying to get some progress started, but we hadn't went back to see what, you know. So yes, I do a lot of that.
Keep on keeping on.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask, when we talk about death penalty, it's often that we talk about victims' family members, but one of the most compassionate stories I've heard is death row inmates and their families. And my question is, how did your family cope when you were on death row?
At first, me and my mom didn't have a good relationship. But after this happened to me, this is what brought us close. My mom went homeless trying to fight for me. But she subsequently lost her life because she had cancer. She ended up with cancer. My mom died in 2014, but before she passed, we had the most beautiful relationship that any mother and daughter could have. She was able to talk to all of her kids before she passed, and it was hard. It was really hard.
How did you find that lawyer, the British lawyer? How did he find you?
That's the good part of my story. I didn't get a chance to tell you guys. When I first got locked up and after I got sentenced, there was a guy that was in another prison who was also convicted for wrongfully convicted. He wrote me a letter and he said they can't do that. They called jailhouse lawyer. I know you heard of those. Well, he was a paralegal. He kept teaching himself until he learned legal. So he wrote me a letter and he said they can't do that. He said, I'm going to put you in touch with some lawyers that I think can help you. That's how I ended up with Clive and Robert McDuff. I found the same guy 25 years later. We just got married December the 8th. And now he's a paralegal and working the court system. That's it. Anybody?
So, what's the situation in Mississippi? Is the death penalty still on the books?
It is, and they also brought back the firing squad. Yep. They are adamant. They do not want to change what they have. It's crazy. That state is off the chain.
Thank you so much for being here. Your story is inspirational. I want to know, how did you keep going? If your future was predetermined by these people, how did you find in yourself the ability to keep going when in fact it seemed as though everyone else wasn't on your side?
When I first got the sentence and ended up on death row, I made it to death row when I was 19 years old. When I went in that room and I slid down that wall and I cried all the time. But I got to the point to say to myself that crying wouldn't fix me. So I started writing a journal. And I started thinking of different scenarios while people were locked up. And I wrote the journal from the time I was locked up to the time I got out. And I published a book called Exonerated, the Sabrina Butler story. So I have a book out, but my book is the lady that helped me with the book is an elderly lady, and she kind of got sick, and we weren't able to push the book like I really want to push it. So I do have it, but it's not everywhere like I would like it to be. But I have put it in a few schools, and that's my goal is to try to get it to teenagers. I can give you the website to where my book is. It's www.sabrinabutler.webs.com. It's all lowercase, so you can find it there. But that's how I gained my strength. Was to write.
This is going to seem ironic or naive, but do you think just based on what you're doing with these exonerees and going around and talking and educating the public, do you think there's a political solution to this? Do you see candidates out there that you think that's the recourse, or do you think that the bureaucracy of the prison system and the whole flawed legal system, you know, that what do we do about that? Do you have any guidance for us local grassroots people?
Well, I think a lot of it was political because the district attorney that was in my case, we pounded the pavement to get him out of office. It took me 30 years, but I got him. I got him out of office, and I got a good district attorney, one that's going to be fair. And I think that that's what we need to do, is to try to get people that are fair in office, not just you know, people that are looking for solutions for themselves or to fix their own, whatever the case may be. I think that we do need to call our legislators more. I think we need to just get in their face. That's the only thing I know to do, and to educate, to teach. Because lack of knowledge is what the problem is. I think a lot of people think that it's one way when it's really not. Because when we went to the justice system, they were like, well, we thought you guys were taken care of. Okay, how could you think that when we're exonerated people that have been, you know, torture is what you can call it. And then you have programs for people that actually committed crimes. You got re-entry programs for them, but you don't have anything for exonerees, and I think that's crazy. That's crazy.
Can you tell me how this whole experience has had an effect on your faith?
It's brought me closer, because at first I was angry with God when I first got locked up for like 3 years. I was just mad because I couldn't figure out. I tried to take my son to them for help and say, look, somebody help me, but you called me a murderer. And then the girl next to me, she smothered 2 babies and she got 15 years. I'm like, really? Are you serious? I mean, that's why I don't believe that the death penalty is correct, because you give certain people the death penalty. If you're going to charge somebody with murder, why not all the people that have committed the crime of murder? Why not you giving some the death penalty and you're not giving others? That doesn't make any sense. When you're supposed to be paying for killing another person, right? Everybody should be on death row that has a murder charge, correct? But that's not the case. That's not the case. And that's where the problem comes in.
How do you have conversations with your daughter in a way that makes sense of your story for her?
When I started, I waited until they got of age before I started talking to them. And I finally got a chance to find where my son was buried. So I started my conversation with them about what happened and why. Because I had a 2-year-old at the time. And when I got out, he was 14. So that was a battle too, to try to, I had to fight 4 years to get him back from the grandmother. So Danny is okay now, that's his name. Danny is okay, he's 32 years old. And we have a lovely relationship. But it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, because the kids actually get mad because they can't come. They want to come to these events, but I can't, you know, I can't afford that, you know, to, because, I mean, it's a lot. I do a lot of this, so, yeah. But they understand, they do.
Did you have people that did not support you while you were on death row?
Well, not really. No, just the public, you know, the general public, because they took the case and made me seem like a monster. You know what I mean? So quite naturally, you know, in that little town, everybody was like, "Oh, she's a monster. She's this and she's that." But my family was always there, you know, and that's pretty much what I had until the end, till I was exonerated. Yeah.
I'm just finishing reading the book Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. It's about Southern institutionalized racism. I just hear your story, and I feel like if you've been a white girl whose baby would have died in the same way, you would have never been charged.
No, I know several cases that's there in the county where I was that is like that. That's what I spoke about, the girl with the 2 babies. She got 15 years. She's been out. I mean, you know, it's a lot of cases like that. That's why I don't understand. That's why I know the justice system needs an overhaul. It needs a boot.
Have you met the people who work in that project that Brian Stevenson's doing?
No, I haven't. I haven't had the opportunity. No, ma'am, I haven't. Well, that would be awesome. I like to meet people. That's what I do. I like that. Anybody?
What's the best way to support the work of you and others like you?
Well, Witness to Innocence is witnesstoinnocence.org, and you can go there and you can look at all the exonerees, and our website is up and it tells exactly what we do, and then other organizations, a lot of them out there. But like I was saying earlier, I think the best thing to do is to pound the pavement and start talking to our legislators and let them know, get in their face and bug the crap out of them. That's the only thing I know to do. I mean, I would just bug them, just look, please, listen. That's all I know to do.
Can you repeat that website?
Say that again?
Can you repeat the website?
It's www.witnesstoinnocence.org. Bug them, just bug them. Answer the pockets.
We're going to bug the crap out of those legislators. So we're going to follow her advice and bug the crap out of our legislators and repeal the death penalty this year. And I want to acknowledge that there's 3 or 4 legislators besides myself here. Stand up wherever you are, because I can't see. Brian, where's Polly? Anyways, I want to talk to you about House Bill 455, which is the bill that will be voted on this year that will repeal the death penalty. One of the things about the death penalty is that it can transcend kind of traditional political divides. In New Hampshire, our opposition to the death penalty has always been pretty broad-based in terms of politics. It's not a Democratic issue, it's not a Republican issue. And that's the beauty of the legislation that we have coming before us. It's got, a bipartisan group of legislators who represent everything from, extremely conservative people whose distrust of government is such that they don't trust the government to collect taxes or plow snow, and they certainly don't want to give the government the power to kill prisoners. People who are from a consistent life ethics that believe from womb to tomb that life is precious and should not be extinguished by the state. People, strong libertarians, people are just lots of different reasons that you would oppose the death penalty. But our challenge this year will be to get 283 legislative votes. And I say that because normally my legislative math is 215. I need 201 House members, 13 senators, and 1 governor. The modern math this time is we need 283 because we won't have a governor. So what we need is 267 members of the House, 16 members of the Senate, and when we get those votes together, the abolition, the repeal of the death penalty will become law in the state of New Hampshire, notwithstanding Governor Sununda's threatened vetoes. My hero, Barbara Keshen, also happens to be the chair of the board or emeritus, whatever. She's one of the leading lights in the New Hampshire Coalition of Abolish Death Penalty. She's going to step up and share stuff. And at the end, together, we're going to make a couple of pitches. One, we're going to ask people to get in, just kind of get you, if you may have written out a check, you can still write out another one to help support our work. We also have these darling signs that the New Hampshire Civil Liberties Union has over there, and since in New Hampshire we like doing retail politics, stop by the table and pick up nice in your front yard, don't you think?
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for coming out. This is a fabulous crowd, and I know that there are other things you could have done tonight, other than come up and listen to us, and you took the time, and I really, really appreciate that. And I want to thank our sponsors, Martha Hennessy, Susan Almy, and Jean Burling, for putting this event together. I called them up in the fall and I said, gee, you know, I would really like to have an event in Hanover. Do you guys think you could manage to plan one? And they did, and it was my privilege to work with them, and it was not just a privilege, but it was a lot of fun, and tonight's a culmination of it, and thank you so much. And we're so close, and I know this is going to be the year. Personally, I started advocating against the death penalty when I was a prosecutor, a homicide prosecutor in the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. That was back in 1990. I wrote my first memo to Steve Merrill about abolishing the death penalty when I was employed by him. I've been advocating for repeal ever since. And my reasons have changed over the years. And I want to talk about, I think, what is the most important reason now for New Hampshire to repeal the death penalty. You know, people say, well, we don't really have the death penalty in New Hampshire. In all 200 years, we've only executed 24 people. There's only one person on death row. A lot of people don't even know that we have the death penalty. So, you know, but you know, what's the big deal about New Hampshire having the death penalty? Many of the legislators that I've spoken to over the years have talked about what they call, well, what I call, New Hampshire exceptionalism. I mean, we know that bad things happen in other states, but not here in New Hampshire. We have a fabulous public defenders program. We have great attorney generals. They're people of integrity. Nothing like that happens in other states would ever happen here. And I take that argument by them very seriously, and I want to kind of address it because I've been thinking about it. And the word that I'm thinking about tonight is acquiescence. In the last decade, as I've been the chair of the coalition, I have heard story after story like Sabrina's, of people who came forward and who said that they were wrongfully convicted and they were proven to be wrongfully convicted. And usually there are two reasons, one of two reasons. It's either they were prosecuted by corrupt prosecutors who withheld evidence, like in the case of Serena's. They knew about her son's medical condition. They did not turn that evidence over to her attorneys at trial. Or they have the second whammy, which Sabrina also suffered, and that is that they have not just inadequate counsel, but terrible counsel. I mean, one of the things Sabrina didn't tell you is that one of her lawyers was a divorce lawyer. She was appointed in a capital case for $1,500, a divorce lawyer to represent her. And I wish I could tell you that's the only time I've ever heard that. But I haven't. I've heard it countless times. People being represented by real estate lawyers, people being represented by friends of the judge, who the judges know are incompetent, but they're appointed because, hey, they get $1,500 and don't have to do very much, do they? This kind of corruption is rampant throughout our country when it comes to the death penalty. And the reason it is so important for New Hampshire to abolish its death, and we're counting on people like you to help us do it. So now I get to make the pitch. We've been bringing bills now in front of the legislature with friendly legislators like Rennie, who filed bills for us for about 10 years. And the truth is, it really takes about $40,000 a year to shepherd a bill through the legislation. Kind of shocking, but that's a realistic figure. And we need your help to reach out to however many new legislators, especially in the House, there are this year. The House is always turned over. People come in. Death penalty is not on their agenda. They don't know much about the death penalty. They need education, they need outreach, they need courting. They need to hear the kind of stories that you heard tonight. And that's what we will do with the money that you donate here tonight. So there are many ways that you can donate. One of them was brand new to me. Our executive director, John Michael, had to explain to me that if you have a cell phone, do any of you here have a cell phone? If you have a cell phone, you can pull it out and you can scan one of these two barcodes, I guess they're called, barcodes, into your phone, and you can donate to us just through the magic of doing that. And there are two ways that you can donate to us. One is on the top one, it says scan for non-tax deductible donations, and since essentially Trump has taken away deductible donations, if you do that, then we can use your money to head-on lobbying, which we need. And if you would like a tax deduction, you can scan on the bottom bar, and that you will get something that will be tax deductible. And if you have any questions about that, speak to that guy right over there. For those of you who like checks, you can write us a check, and we would be grateful for it. And we have envelopes that I think have been distributed on the chair. You can stick your check in an envelope. If you don't have a check with you tonight and you want to think about it, at the very least, please put down your name and your email legibly so that we can send you updates about where we are with the bill this year. It's easy to join our organization, to become a member, and membership is important. It's really important when I testify in front of the legislature to be able to say we have 3,000 members, or we have 4,000 or 5,000 members. That's really, every single membership really counts. And if you go to our website, which is, you can Google it. If you Google New Hampshire death penalty, you'll get to us, but it's no death penalty, nh.org. There's a menu that you can click down, and it says about us, and you can join us. It's free. It takes you, as NPR says, you can do this in 15 seconds. So please, any way that you can, if you'd like to reach out to us and talk to us some more and find out other ways that you can help us with this effort, this is going to be the year. And when I look out and I see this crowd in Hanover, New Hampshire, I know this is going to be the year. Thank you.
Thank you. I had an interesting scenario on the way over. So I was driving, I was a little bit late, I called until I was eating all and I was driving in front of Jesse's, and I saw a man on the street with a